NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States. And in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from the Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Podcast. We had our awesome mock draft yesterday with the Orange and Brown Talk crew and the Buckeye Talk crew. If you missed that, go to cleveland.com/podcast and listen into that. But we have an exclusively Strictly Stripes pod pre-draft edition for you right here, right now. Welcome into another podcast with yours truly, Muhammad Ahmad, joined by Andrew Gillis and Mike Neislick. And obviously, beyond the mock draft we did yesterday, we talked to head coach Zach Taylor and members of the Bengals locker room. We hadn't heard from up until basically Monday because these are obviously voluntary workouts. And I think one name that is definitely worth talking about that we haven't heard from since his injury, which was in December, is La'el Collins. He's still rehabbing from his torn ACL, which came when the Bengals played the Patriots last year in Week 16. So we saw him for the first time, like I said, since then. He said he's progressing, he's feeling good. But what's interesting is he mentioned that going into last year, he admitted he wasn't playing fully healthy, which isn't really shocking because obviously he had that rest day on Wednesdays as a veteran. He had a veteran's rest day, but it looked like it was more than that, and maybe that's what caught up to him, right when he got hurt. But he expects to compete at right tackle. It sounds like the team is leaning in that direction. If Jonah Williams is still here, assuming he's not traded, you have him, Cody Ford, who's also going to be in the mix, and possibly Jackson Carman, who Zach Taylor has mentioned as someone who he thinks can play right tackle. So you got a lot of names in there. You got a lot of questions about what's going to happen at that position. But, I mean, just thinking about it, guys, obviously this is contingent on his health, and it depends on how well his rehab goes since he's been back and forth in Dallas and Cincinnati for his rehab. I mean, do you think there's a legit chance that, even with Jonah Williams being in the mix, that he could beat him out and win the starting job? Or do you think at this point he's maybe going to be kind of that swing tackle that Hakeem Adeniji was last year?
Well, I think that there's a couple different factors kind of playing into that. You got to talk about La'el's recovery first because, obviously he's very optimistic. He said that he could brace it up and play today, he feels, if he had to. I don't know if it would clear that, considering he had a January surgery. He said he didn't remember the day, but he has a January surgery. We're recording this on April 25th. That's really, really quick to do that. So, you've still likely got months ahead for him. So the injury thing, that's obviously a big deal. Then obviously is Jonah Williams on the roster. That's another huge deal. There's just a lot of factors there to kind of decide if it's really going to be a competition, because again, it could be a competition if La'el's healthy for training camp. But what happens if La'el misses 2 weeks and he's kind of behind the 8 ball, and Jonah's maybe worked off some of the rust of switching from left to right? There's just a lot of factors there. So, I think right now, ideally, you'd like to have all of them on the roster because, again, having offensive line depth is pretty important, as we saw last year, or at least last season in the playoffs when you go to Kansas City and the lack of depth and the injuries kind of really started to show. So. I don't know. I think that there's just a lot playing into that right now. It's just too hard to tell.
And, he didn't practice at all on Wednesdays last year. And, he says he was really unhealthy. So it's hard to sort of square the two. Is he going to need those veteran days off? I think that's kind of that puts him behind other guys that will be able to practice every day. I think the Bengals like the fact that they have everybody available to sort of develop that chemistry, get the playbook down, and do things, game plan every week and things like that. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think he has to. There's some gamesmanship in terms of he's going to want other teams to think he's healthy if the Bengals did move on, or feeling good or moving in that direction. So, I mean, it behooves him to sort of be optimistic and say, hey, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's do this. I think if he's on the roster, he's going to compete for playing time because he's a veteran, and he's a good option to have, to push guys. But at the same time, no, I don't think he's ready today to suit up. I think that would be obviously a disaster. But
Yep.
I think he's ahead of those young guys that you mentioned. I think he'd be. You saw in the playoffs, he'd be better than Hakeem Adeniji, Jackson Carman, and Cody Ford, who, by the way, hasn't played tackle had one appearance last year, but really hasn't played since 2019.
And that's when he was with the Buffalo Bills, and that was actually the same year he had a controversial play against the Houston Texans in the playoffs. So his time at tackle has been interesting in his short career. But, you mentioned Mike, that's if he's on the roster. We talked a lot about this, obviously, way back kind of after the season, pre-combine, post-combine. I mean, do you still see the possibility, for either of you guys, I'm just curious, do you still see him as being a June 1st cut, or do you think they're going to just roll with the depth they have, regardless of what happens with Jonah, and then just kind of see what happens from there?
No, I'd keep him on the roster as long as you can. I mean, you're kind of at the point now where most of your free agent spending is done. If you need a decent amount of cap space, I mean, there's to me a way likelier option in Joe Mixon. There's kind of that too, because again, with the offensive line, they were really, really healthy through pretty much the entire year. And then it just kind of, the train kind of derailed on Christmas Eve, starting with Collins. Then Alex Kappa goes down, Jonah Williams goes down. It just, I mean, you need depth on the offensive line because, you're just not going to get through a full 17 with 5 guys. I mean, if they do, props to them, but you just can't account for that. And, if you're starting, let's say your starting 5 is Orlando Brown, Cordell Volson, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, Jonah Williams, feeling good about that 5, but then you go to your depth and Jackson Carman's there, Max Sharping's there, Trey Hill's there. Sharping and Hill are interior guys. Carman and Collins can play outside. Carman's also played inside. So you have Cody Ford at tackle, Hakeem Adeniji. I mean, you can probably move him, guard or tackle. There's a lot of options and there's a lot of versatility there, but to me, if Collins is a depth piece for this team next year, that's a really good sign of kind of where the strength of this offensive line is. So I mean, if that guy is backing up, especially if he's not healthy to start the year, or if he's not ready to play in a game to start the year, I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing. So I'd absolutely hang on to him, just because you're not going to get through a season or a full 17 likely with both your tackles healthy. So. Yeah, I'd keep Collins around as long as you can.
So let's assume, though, that the draft is 2 days away. We're going to talk more about that, by the way, later in the podcast. But I mean, let's say you get to draft day, you're at pick 28, and somehow you land Darnell Wright, or you take DeJuan Jones, among other names we've talked about. I mean, at that point, even if it's not Collins necessarily, because I'm kind of leaning where you are, Andrew, I think that's a good sign of depth to have, but do you cut somebody at some point, whether it's Hakeem Adeniji, Deontay Smith, who I don't think has kind of developed into that project they anticipated, a former 4th-round pick? I mean, do you just put someone on the practice squad? Because if you think about it, you're getting pretty bloated at right tackle. Because like I said, you've got Jonah Williams, La'el Collins, Cody Ford, Hakeem Adeniji, and maybe, who knows, a first-round pick who could play right tackle. Do you maybe start to consider cutting someone at that point, or is it more of a practice squad move?
Yeah, I think, they probably, well, it depends. I mean, if they draft somebody like with one of their higher picks, I think you're probably not going to keep everybody. I mean, practice squad is certainly a possibility. But I think you'd have to sort of balance sort of the numbers there. But if they say, hey, we're really good with the numbers we have, maybe just one goes on the practice squad and everybody else is part of sort of the 53-man roster. I think they want to give themselves depth. I think they got hit hard last year with injuries, obviously. And so I think that they're being sort of extra cautious in terms of, trying to make sure that that's not a problem again.
Yeah, and if you look at like their practice squad, I mean, really the only other names you got are Devin Cochran and Nate Gilliam. Gilliam's an interior guy, so as far as tackle goes, the only other guy you have on your practice squad is Devin Cochran, which, I mean, that's pretty much it. He's never played an NFL snap. And then, you got Jackson Carman on the left side, presumably if you want to kind of spread it out, or you put Deontay Smith there and keep Carman in one of those two tackle spots. But like you said, I mean, it's really going to come down to Lyle Collins or Jonah Williams. Now, what I'm posing as a hypothetical, because like we've established, like this can only happen if and when Collins is healthy. But let's say Collins is just somehow good to go. He does really well with his rehab and he starts training again and he can compete with Jonah Williams. I mean, just based off of what we saw last year, I mean, we don't know how they're going to look on the field till we see him, but based on what you saw last year, like, who do you think has a better chance of winning that spot? Is it Collins with the experience he's had at right tackle, or is it Williams who, they gave a 5th-year extension to and is a first-round pick and I got the really high on? I mean, like, do you? I mean, I know the plan is to move him to right tackle, but like, do you see him beating out Collins for that job?
I mean, I think it'll depend. I mean, Jonah Williams has to sort of show us how he's going to make the transition to the right side of the line. It's not easy. I mean, it's not moving from the interior outside or outside of the interior, but it's still you're changing footwork, changing your hand placement and things like that. So, I mean, there could be some rust, and so, I mean, he hasn't played it, I think, since early in his career at Alabama. So, I mean, that's not going to be we don't know if he's already, I mean, he's kind of upset about the trade. Is he working on those things by himself? Is he sort of hoping, holding out hope that he's traded? I think it'll be interesting to see when he kind of reports and when he sort of starts making that transition. I think the longer that takes, the better, Lyle Collins, if he's healthy, will be able to sort of, get a foothold on the job. But I think it'll be an interesting competition. I don't think we'll be able to sort of make I'm not sure who the favorite is, because I think, obviously both are, Williams is also rehabbing an injury. So both have some things going on that they'll need to work through.
What do you think, Andrew?
Sorry, I was busy. The Bengals just picked up Joe Burrow's 5th-year option. So I was scrolling through Twitter as Mike was answering that. I mean,
okay,
that's really news. It's like the most no-brainer thing in the world. We have a little bit of live. I mean, feels like every time podcasters do this, it always happens like right when they end recording. So this is good that this is happening while we're on the podcast. For Burrow. Long-term negotiations are still kind of ongoing. But you do pick up that 5th year, which obviously, guarantees him through 2024. So some kind of breaking news there. Pretty much to be expected. And now you basically buy yourself an extra year of negotiations if you need it. It doesn't sound like things are going to be contentious, just kind of picking up on things that people say and Duke Tobin and, Zach Taylor and everybody like that. But so Joe Burrow, 5th-year option locked in. I have no idea what you asked me about the offensive line. I completely forget.
You were so focused on the breaking news, man.
Yeah,
good timing, right?
Like as soon as you see like a Rappaport notification come across, which by the way, the report was for him. As soon as you see one of those comes across, your heart just kind of skips a beat. So I have no idea what you said. You could have said the most wild stuff in the world, and I would have no idea.
Oh, I was talking about that one time I went into a bank and like robbed it and got away with it. And I guess you missed out on a crazy story, man. I was like in the bank and I didn't even have to do anything. I just said, give me the money, and they gave it to me, bro. Like, I'm just like Joe Burrow. I walked in there and said, give me my money. But yeah, and I mean, like, there you go. So Burrow will be with the team for officially 1 more year, but rest assured, he's going to be in Cincinnati for a while. How long, we're going to find out in a matter of God knows how long. I mean, could be next week, could be next month, could maybe be next year. I don't know. But what I was asking Mike, what I want to ask you is, if you're in a situation where Collins and Williams are both healthy, going into training camp, just based on what you saw last year from each player, like, do you see Collins holding on to his job, or do you think Jonah Williams will flex whatever he showed early at Alabama when he played right tackle and say, hey, that's why I'm a first-round pick, and that's why I won the job? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think it depends a lot on Collins' health because, like I said, if Jonah gets a 2-week head start or something like that, if Lael's not ready to play or whatever, then that job feels really good for Jonah. But I mean, what if the there's a lot of what ifs and there's a lot of hypotheticals. Like, what if that transition to the right side doesn't go as smoothly for Jonah as you might hope, and Lael's healthy and he looks good in the first week of training camp, and then all of a sudden throw a dart, the Arizona Cardinals left tackle goes down. Like, and then, I mean, are you open to a trade of Williams then? Like, there's a lot of different kind of hypotheticals here. So, I mean, I would start with Jonah. I think you have to start there, but I think you can pivot if necessary. And I mean, that's kind of one of the benefits of having that depth because, like I said, if Jonah's there and Jonah's your right tackle, that means you feel at least decent, at the very least, about kind of what he can do there. Now, all of a sudden, you have him at right tackle, Lael's a backup, and you have a guy who was, on your starting offensive line last year who's now a backup. And for all intents and purposes, that offensive line should be better than it was a year ago. So, yeah, I just think that you're going to have to wait and see. And, I mean, a lot of it's dependent on Collins' health because if Collins is not ready, then I don't really see a situation in which Jonah Williams on the roster doesn't start.
When we come back, we're going to pivot this conversation to the draft, which is the talk of the land all across the NFL right now. But before we get to that talk, we want to remind you guys to sign up for our Strictly Stripes newsletter. It is the best Cincinnati Bengals news, opinion, and analysis newsletter out there. Sign up at cleveland.com/newsletters and make sure you click on Strictly Stripes newsletter for the option. It's free. It's in your inbox every morning, and you get the best insights and reporting from me, Mike, and Andrew. Don't go away. We'll be right back on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
Hey guys, if you love college football, we think you'll like the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and my co-host Shahan Jeharaja and I, each week we talk about the best programs, best coaches, best players in the sport. It's all football, no off-field stuff, no legislation. It's about the teams that are going to matter most in the playoff race. Will Georgia three-peat? Always on the lookout for angry Bama. The Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan battling at the top and Penn State on the rise. The Pac-12 matters again, not just USC, but Oregon and Washington as well. The playoff is expanding. Expand your podcast listening. Try the College Football Survivor Show wherever you find podcasts.
Who wants to do the subtext? Who wants to have the honors for that?
Mike, can you do that? Appreciate it.
Just so I don't blindside you, I wanted to get that ready. All right, thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we talked a lot about the health of the right tackle position for the Bengals, but that could be affected by what happens in 2 days, which is the big day, the NFL draft this Thursday in Kansas City. Before we talk about the draft, though, I want to remind you all to sign up for Cincinnati Football Insider. It's our subtext service where we bring you the latest and best breaking news, opinion, and analysis before social media, before the web, and before anywhere and anyone else. See, it means you're special. You're so special. We tell you before we tell anyone else. So join the Cool Kids Club. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals and sign up. And Mike, I know you've been all over subtext lately, talking a lot about the draft and the Bengals being back at workouts. I mean, what do people need to know about subtext that I didn't even mention already? That's so awesome.
Yeah, well, I think you missed the discussion aspect. I've talked about this a lot before. I mean, readers or subscribers can ask us questions, directly, so we see it and can have a discussion, bring up these topics on the podcast or mailbags or do a lot of different things with that. So I think that's kind of a fun part. Obviously, you get breaking news and opinion delivered right to your cell phone, and that's sort of a fun way to keep track of everything that's going on in Bengals world.
Wonderful, wonderful. So kind of going back to our draft talk, like I mentioned, we've been hypothesizing, if that's even a word, projecting basically what we think the Bengals will do at certain positions and where they're going to handle those positions. I think we have to start with running back, obviously, because that's one of the most pressing needs right now, because you need one no matter what happens to Joe Mixon, pending his legal case and what have you. But one thing I think was interesting from Zach Taylor that he talked about is, he was very vague when I asked him, like, what do you kind of look for in a running back? But, when he was kind of asked about pass block protection from a running back, you could tell that was something that was very important to him and very important to the offense, which makes sense because that's what P. Ryan gave them. Obviously, you look at his PFF numbers, which we could go through for days. He was one of the best at being a pass blocking running back. And so I don't know if that's exactly going to be like the deal breaker or what stands out for the Bengals on their draft board, because only they know what their draft board looks like. But, you look at some of the best mid-round prospects who are good with that, just based on film and based on PFF numbers. You've got Dwayne McBride, who we selected, I think, in our last mock draft we had last week or the week before that, one of those 2 weeks. We had him on one of our mock drafts. Chris Rodriguez from Kentucky, who I covered his freshman year when I was, covering the Cats when I was a student. He was one of the better pass block protectors at his position last year. This is a name we haven't really talked a lot about. You got Ty J. Spears from Tulane. I don't know if he's necessarily slept on. I think he's a very solid mid-round pick. There's a reason why we haven't heard much about him. But I think one of the sneaky things about him is he's got a really good look when it comes to, like I mentioned, kind of pass block protection. The PFF numbers kind of match that. But here's the thing, though. One of the best pass blocking running backs in this entire draft, it's a no-brainer. I'm sure Andrew knows the answer. It's Bijan Robinson. I mean, we could talk about how fast he is, how strong he is, everything about him. Guess what? He can pass block too. So at that point, I mean, if Bijan is there, you take him. I think no matter who else is there, except maybe – actually, no, you got to take the guy if he's there. But, let's say here's a hypothetical since I mentioned this, and this kind of proves the point. Let's say you're at, pick 22, 23 – and he's still on the board. You're at 28, and you don't want anybody to take him. You're like, we got to get him. We really want him. Even if you're high on Michael Mayer or whoever else, you want him. I mean, is there a situation where, you consider trading up? Or is it not worth going all out for a guy like Bijan Robinson?
Well, I've long said that I think the Bengals should be open to trading up. I don't know if it'd be for a running back, but if there's somebody on the board that they feel like could be an impact player, I don't see that why you have to be precious about keeping picks down the line in a spot where, you're one or two players. And I think, people have heard me say this before, away from winning a Super Bowl. I think you need to be aggressive, but that's not how Duke Tobin has operated. So I'd be surprised, I guess, if they did do that. But I wouldn't, begrudge them from making a move. I don't know if Robinson fits that sort of mold that, I think maybe it would make more sense to actually trade back and see if you can land Gibbs in the early 30s if he's still available. That might fit sort of what the Bengals like to do. But like I said, if they have him graded high enough, and you can trade up 5 spots and not give up the farm, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Does it make sense, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm just not trading up for running back ever. I don't think I don't think trading if you're going to trade up for somebody, I could listen on trading up for a player like Mike said who's going to help. I'm typically pro trade down. I think in kind of an ideal world, you want to end every draft with 10 to 12 picks. Because I mean, even if you're a terrible drafting team, you're going to have some hits out of that. So, typically I'm doing that. So, I understand it's Bijan, and I understand he's a different cat, but you're not trading up for a running back. If you're going to trade up, it's because you're getting a Miles Murphy, you're getting a Kalijah Cansey, you're getting, maybe you really love Deonte Banks, like maybe you like Michael Mayer, like you're moving up for somebody who is going to help you for 5 years at least. And I'm not saying Bijan wouldn't do that, but you're doing it, I think, for a premium position if you're going to do that.
So you're saying if you trade up, you'd only do it with a defensive lineman, and you mentioned it was Miles Murphy, right?
Well, no, it doesn't have to be defensive lineman specifically. It could be a corner. It could be a defensive lineman. I mean, maybe you're like I would be floored if this is the case, but I mean, maybe Paris Johnson's there at 20, and you really like what he can do, and then it makes a Jonah trade more attractive. I don't know, there's a billion different scenarios that could kind of happen. But yeah, I'm not moving up for a running back. If I'm going to move up, it would be for a premium position, a position of significant value. Like I said, where you're getting a pass rusher, you're getting a defensive back, you're getting a tackle. I know we did this in our massive mock draft the other day. If you want to move up 2 picks for a 4th round pick, that's fine. If you want to get Mayer or something like that, I wouldn't be moving up a significant amount, if at all, for a running back. I just don't think that that's a smart use of resources.
Ever? Or just with Robinson?
Ever. I mean, if there was a running back that you would want to move up for, it would be Bijan Robinson. But I mean, if you're going to move up from 28 to 23, I mean, what is that? A 3rd round pick and a 5th round? I don't know. I would have to look at the trade chart to kind of see, because the trade chart's actually pretty accurate. But I looked up the trade chart, like I said in our mock yesterday. And, in our hypothetical world, we made a brief switch with the Cowboys where we moved up to 26, and that cost us a 4th round pick. But that was also kind of like a fair trade compared to the draft board. So for me, I mean, I'm not giving up a significant amount of assets to go get a running back, especially, I mean, when this team has other needs. And I understand it's Bijan, but yeah, I'm not interested in that.
No, I think that's fair. But speaking of defensive line, I mean, I think this was where Zach Taylor was the most vague. Was he literally said, we just want a guy who fits our needs, and he just said it's kind of a year-to-year thing as far as different needs playing that position. So, I mean, I would imagine if there's even a mold you could imagine, I guess it's the DJ Reader, BJ Hill mold. They're both 6'2". They're both about, I forget their weights, but I know they're both at least 300 pounds. So I guess that's kind of a blueprint. But, I mean, I feel like I mentioned, if Bijan is on the board, you have to take him. Well, I think if he's well off the board by that point, which he'd have to be, I think, especially if the Cowboys trade up to take him, which seems like a possibility. Let's say you have Kalijah Cansey on the board. I think you got to run to him. Not because I think he's the next Aaron Donald. I know that those projections are overblown, overhyped. I get it. They both went to Pitt. They're both undersized, and he ran like 100th of a second faster with his 40-yard dash. But, I mean, I don't know, Andrew. If you see Kalijah Cansey there, and you think about DJ Reader, almost turning 30, on a team where they don't like to extend guys past their 30s, do you say, Kalijah Cansey, welcome to Cincinnati, or do you still feel gung-ho or, I guess, high on, someone like Michael Mayer, if he's there too?
I mean, it depends. I think, is Miles Murphy there? I'm trying to think, is Murphy there? Is Cansey there? Did one of the corners fall? I just think that there's so many hypotheticals here. Cansey would be, I think, a really good pick, because I think he'd be a great 3-tech. You pair him with Reader, you get a little bit more of an interior pass rush, and you would hope that helps out Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, kind of collapses the pocket a little bit more. He is a little undersized, so maybe that would be the reason why he would fall. But again, I just don't see, it's hard to count out really any scenario. So, I mean, if Cansey's there, he's got to be at the top. If he's the number 1 guy on the board, or he's near it, just because of, kind of when you look at who he is as a player and kind of what he can give you I think it fits a position of need for the Bengals. And, it really would kind of boost your defense. So Kancey, to me, is a player that if he's there, you feel really good about.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen Kancey play. Covered the Virginia Tech when they played Pitt.
That's
I'm not
right.
sure that he's the sort of impact player, especially in the short term. How much would he get in that rotation? I don't know about that one. I know he's kind of like been a late riser in sort of the draft process. So, there's a lot of buzz around him right now, but I'm not necessarily sold on sort of that, the defensive interior guys at that spot. Brian Breesy's another one where I'm just not as sold on them as maybe, some others. And so, I prefer an edge rusher as opposed to an interior guy. But that's just kind of my view of it.
I don't think either or is the wrong choice. I mean, we talked about kind of the way Trey Hendrickson played last year and, his contract, which is, coming to an end sooner than later. I mean, that's not a bad option to build on now, and I think, maybe the more pressing need is defensive tackle because Reader is actually going to a contract year and you don't know about BJ Hill beyond 2023. But yeah, I think it just depends on if Murphy's there, if Kancey's there, or really if only one of them's there, it narrows down the option. Like if Kancey's gone or vice versa, then you kind of have your bearings there. But I guess just to wrap up here, tight end is a position I want to kind of get back to because I mentioned Michael Mayer's name. One of the things I also think sort of solidifies what they're looking for in a tight end is kind of like with running back, and especially with tight end, they want someone who's a good run blocker. Because, a lot of times with those formations, you're going up against defensive ends, which in some cases, like the Browns, where your best player is basically Myles Garrett, you may have to go against the Myles Garrett, in some formations. And so at that point, let's say you have Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer both on the board. We can all agree that Kincaid's the better receiving tight end, but Mayer, even if he's not the best blocker, he's a heck of a lot better of a blocker and way more athletic. Does that make that option much easier? Or, let's say both of them are off the board even. So this is kind of a two-part question. The first part is, do you kind of go with Mayer or Kincaid? And the second part is, if not, do you lean towards Darnell Washington, Luke Schoonmaker? Do you go even lower and look at Josh Wow? Because those are also guys who are really good at pass blocking too and run blocking.
Yeah, I think Kincaid or Mayer at that spot are no-brainer picks, especially with the need you have at tight end. I don't know what they view it internally as to who they would have rated first. I'd have a hard time believing both would be available at that spot. But I also think that there's something to be said for how talented of a group of tight ends there is, and they could get somebody in the second or third round. I know you didn't mention Sam Laporta. He's out there. Schoonmaker, I think, is a good option. So, there are other guys that could probably come in and compete and give them, some important snaps here. So I don't think they have to take a tight end, but I think, if one of those guys is available or both of those guys available, I'd have a hard time seeing them pass up, the best player at the position probably on their board, at that spot at number 28. I think that's good value.
What do you think, Andrew? Do you lean kind of where Mike is saying with the value, or do you sort of think ahead and think, okay, we can maybe, I guess what I mean is if Mayer and Kincaid are both gone and you can get a Darnell Washington or a Luke Schoonmaker or maybe Marshawn Ford even from Louisville, who's a good pass blocking end, do you just kind of just anticipate that one of those guys is on the board by that point and just hope to go for one of them?
Well, yeah, if Kincaid and Mayer are gone, I would kind of be surprised if Musgrave and Washington are high on that board, because if both of those tight ends are gone, I don't think that, there's 27 picks before the Bengals. I'm not sure that this is it's just a math problem at that point. How many quarterbacks go? There's a lot of talk right now about, maybe Hendon Hooker sneaking into the first round. What happens if you get 5 quarterbacks that go in the top 27 and both tight ends are gone? Okay, well then somebody's dropping. Like one of the tackles that isn't supposed to be there might be there. One of the defensive linemen that's supposed to be there might be there. So to me, I look at that and say that, if Mayer and Kincaid are not there, it's not even that you feel good about the tight ends later. It's that somebody who you didn't think was going to be at 28 is probably going to be at 28.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at like options outside of number 28, like if you're looking second, third, whatever round beyond that, I mean, I think you can't go wrong with either of those names. Darnell Washington is interesting. Like, I feel like at that point he'd be more of a, I don't want to say they'll use him like a Hakeem Adeniji, like a jumbo tight end, but like he wouldn't really fit what they're looking for outside of the blocking, obviously. Great receiver, but I just feel like if you're looking for a receiver and a blocker, I like Loon Schoonmaker. I know Mike is high on him. He's talked a lot about him on this podcast. And heck, I mean, if like for whatever reason you don't shop for a tight end until like the 4th, 5th, 6th round, like Josh Wiles from down the street, who knows where he is on the board? I mean, I mentioned Marshawn Ford. He might be a sneaky pick depending on where he lands. But like I said, I'm just nitpicking whatever details we got from Taylor and thinking, hey, so does that mean there's a chance for Bijan Robinson or Michael Mayer? And I could be completely wrong, but that's the beauty of this podcast. I want to wrap up with 2 quick things. One, somewhat serious, and then something not even serious at all. I mean, we didn't mention this yesterday because we were doing our mock draft pod, but Aaron Rodgers to the Jets, it's officially done. We can finally stop talking about it because it's a done deal. He's been traded for basically a bunch of picks that fleeced the Jets and gifted the Packers, long story short. I mean, like, do you guys agree? Are the Jets getting fleeced here, or is Aaron Rodgers just going to look at everyone and say, I am still the MVP, I am still playing my best ball, and you guys can't stop me? Or are we just going to laugh and say, he pulled a Brett Favre, his career's done, he's just going to get nothing out of this? Like, I mean, what's your instant impression on that?
Well, I mean, it's a lot for what might amount to be a 1-year deal. I mean, we've talked about this in the past where, what is it if he plays 65% of the plays? That second round pick next year becomes a first. Like, that's a lot considering that we might be in a situation where Aaron Rodgers could just retire at the end of this year. I mean, he had a down 2022 season. I just don't know if he's going to be there in 2024. And if you're giving up a first round pick in 2024 for a guy who might not be on the roster, now obviously the hope is that pick is very, very high. But I just don't think that that's necessarily smart business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I mean, he hasn't been motivated, I felt like, in recent years. I mean, he's sort of been so frustrated with the Packers organization. I think it's overshadowed his sort of play at times, and you could kind of sense the frustration from both sides. I mean, spite is a big motivator. So, do they get a guy that really wants to go out and prove something? Does he give them another year or two after that? I think, don't forget, Brett Favre didn't give the Jets anything, but he did come within like one throw of reaching a Super Bowl for the Vikings. So
that's true.
So it remains to be seen. I think it could end up being a disaster, but I also think that, there's room to say, like, if he has something left in the tank and really wants to stick it to, Green Bay because he feels like they kind of ruined the last couple of years of his, what was supposed to be kind of the swan song of his career. Maybe it could, they could win this, win the trade, especially. But, I think it could go either way.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wonder, like, is he really playing like the MVP quarterback he was like the year before last year, and was 2022 an anomaly where he just, I don't know, his receivers weren't clicking or he just wasn't motivated, which he definitely wasn't. I mean, he didn't get along with Matt LaFleur. Like, it's very obvious they just didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, more things than not. But I don't know. I mean, did he just turn 40, or is he turning 40 this year? He's around 40, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah, it's one.
I gotta check. Yeah, I mean, he's 40 this year. I mean, he'll be 41 next year. I mean, Tom Brady was basically 45 when he called it quits not long ago. But like beyond that, I mean, Peyton Manning played till 40. Brett Favre, I guess, was 41. So like, he doesn't have. whatever he has left in the tank can't be that much for the Jets to give up. Like, all that they gave up, I still cannot believe that. The Packers, though, don't get me wrong, if they don't make the best out of, like, what they got with their draft capital and whatnot, I think they're crazy too, but, you know, but it's really, the pressure's on the Jets, though. Like, you guys made the move. You guys gave up more. So if you get anything less than a Super Bowl, you failed. Well, I guess in their case, maybe a playoff run, but even then, like, bro, you gave up a lot. Like, how do you not win a Super Bowl at that point? Which I guess leads me to my next question is, I mean, let's say the Jets, whether they win the East, shock the Bills, and they, like, make it to the playoffs, or they win a wild card. Like, do you see the Bengals, like, looking at them like, oh my gosh, got to play Aaron Rodgers and all those receivers and that number 4 defense they had last year in points per game? Like, do you worry at all, or do you just laugh and say, "Oh, who's Aaron Rodgers? He's washed up. We're gonna beat him."
No, I mean, so they're not on the schedule. So the only time that you'd play them would be in the postseason. So
in the playoffs, yeah, because the Bengals will make the playoffs. I would think.
I just don't look at that. I'm not sure that it matters a ton for the Bengals, just because, again, like I said, they're not on the schedule. The AFC East should be really good this year. You have Buffalo, obviously. The Jets are going to be better. I don't know. I think everybody might be jumping the gun a little bit on how good they're going to be. I think people kind of have thrown them into that Chiefs, Bengals, Bills, Eagles, 49er bucket, which I super am not doing. So I don't know. I'm not sure that there's a lot there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, they got him receivers. They got him his boy Lazard from Green Bay. They got McCole Hardman in free agency. Still got Breece Hall. And then, I mean, you got Garrett Wilson. You got Sauce Gardner on the other side of the ball, who I think is going to be one of the best corners in the league next year. We'll see. But to kind of wrap up with some non-football stuff, I don't know if we've talked about this on this podcast. You guys will have to refresh my memory on this. HBO, Succession, apparently like the buzz of all TV talk right now. Mike, you're a big Succession guy, right? I think you're the one who brought it up.
Yes, I was. I think it was brought up in context of, like, are you going to watch basketball?
Yes. There you go. You refreshed my memory. So, fill me in. How many seasons is Succession?
It's on its 4th and final season.
So, as you could tell, obviously I have never seen it. Andrew, have you seen Succession, or do you know about it?
I mean, I haven't seen it, but it's on the list. Once we hit May and June and early parts of July, we get more time. So hopefully I'll be able to watch it then.
Well, Mike, I want to ask you this. I mean, I'm obviously way behind because I've never seen an episode. And by the way, I don't even know much about the show. Like, why is it a good show? Like, people are comparing it to Breaking Bad, which that's my favorite show. So that's got my attention.
Man.
Like, why is it one of those, like, must-watch shows?
It's got a phenomenal cast of actors. It's got unbelievable production values. Just one of the prettiest shows on television. Shot on location in all sorts of crazy places across the world. And the writing is some of the best in, recent memory. It just doesn't miss. It's just really, really sharp. And obviously very contemporary in terms of the, family. It's sort of obviously, the Murdochs are basically kind of what they sort of, the tentative sort of based on and sort of a look into that sort of scenario of somebody, being sort of a mogul and having to pass down, what they created. It's just a really, really, really good show.
I guess, like Andrew said, I got to add it to the list because that does sound pretty dope. But have either of you guys seen Breaking Bad, by the way, speaking of which?
Yeah, after, let's see, I watched it in COVID lockdown in 2020. I remember I told myself, actually, after the NFL draft was over, I was going to burn through it, and I got through it in about like 3 weeks. It's a really good show. It's probably the best show I've ever seen.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's my favorite show. I almost gave up on the first season, but then my dad, who's like a big Breaking Bad enthusiast, was like, get through the second season and the real fun begins. Then you get to season 3, and I don't want to spoil anything for those listening who have never seen the show, but man, once you get to season 3, man, what do they call the drug that he makes? The crystal. What was it called, Andrew? The meth he made. What do you call it?
Blue. Well, I mean, it's crystal meth.
Right. There's like a word for it. Like there's a name for it. Like blue something. I'm so mad at myself that I don't remember this, but it's okay because I haven't seen it in 5 years. I was like you. I wasn't on lockdown. I was summer break in college before my junior year. I locked myself in my room. I lived in college. I lived at home during college. That's why I thankfully graduated debt free. But I was living at home and I locked myself in my room and I told my mom, I was like, Mom, unless it's life or death, do not bother me all day. And I binge watched the last 2 seasons in 1 or 2 days. So that season 5 was like, I've never done drugs, but if you were to get a thrill from that crystal meth, that's probably what it felt like. I don't know though. Maybe that's just how much I love the show. But I think we're going to end on that note because we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But stay with us tomorrow, being Wednesday. We're going to give you our final draft looks. Look back at, the best picks the Bengals have made and maybe even talk about the what if you never picked Joe Burrow at 1? What if you passed up Jamar Chase for Penei Sewell? It's going to be a nice, fully loaded pre-draft podcast. So make sure you tune in. Once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. See you then.